Aurora Brown and intersectional psychology acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout South Africa and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people listening today. Intersectional Psychology World Suicide Prevention Day Special Changing the Narrative on Suicide. Content note: this episode discusses suicide, mental illness, and genocide. If you're unable to engage with these topics right now, you are welcome to skip this episode or come back to it when you feel better resourced. Hello and welcome back to Intersectional Psychology, the podcast that explores psychology's role in promoting social justice. I'm your host, Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. Today we are back to the good old days where I am flying solo, this time for a very important episode. This episode comes out on the 10th of September, which is World Suicide Prevention Day. Now, this is not just another awareness day on the calendar for me. As a mental health practitioner and as someone personally affected by suicide, this subject is deeply close to my heart. I'm glad you're here with me for it. Suicide and even just mental health and mental illness are still taboo topics that make people uncomfortable and which are clouded in stigma. The uncomfortable silence increases our sense of isolation and aloneness, which is already part of the heavy burden that people who struggle with mental illness or suicidal ideation carry. To combat this silence and stigma, the International Association for Suicide Prevention, or IASP, has made Changing the Narrative on Suicide the theme for World Suicide Prevention Day in 2024, 2025, and 2026. So today I'll be sharing some information that will hopefully empower you to change the narrative on suicide, to support those around you who are struggling, and to ask for help when you need it. Suicide worldwide. Every year, around 720,000 people die by suicide. That's one person every 40 seconds. For every suicide, there are many more attempts, and every single one of those is a tragedy that ripples through families, communities, and generations. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds, and it happens everywhere, not only in high-income countries, but across all regions of the world. In fact, 73% of suicides occur in low and middle-income countries. Here in South Africa, the most recent figures show 22.3 suicides per 100,000 people. with men dying by suicide at a rate of 3.4 times higher than women. Globally, men are more likely to die by suicide, but women are more likely to attempt it. This disparity is likely due to men using more medically serious suicidal behavior. Numbers alone don't tell the whole story, but they do show us that suicide is a global public health issue. And like all public health issues, it's one that we can change. Breaking the stigma. Despite how common mental health struggles are, 1 in 5 people experience a mental health condition every year, suicide and mental illness are still surrounded by stigma and silence. That silence can be deadly. Fear of judgment, fear of being seen as quote-unquote weak, cultural taboos, and even outdated religious or legal frameworks all make it harder to speak openly. And so people suffer alone, believing that they're the only one. A big part of that stigma comes from traditional gender norms. We've been taught rigid stories about what it means to be a real man or a proper woman. For men, the message is often, be strong, don't cry, solve your problems alone. Asking for help is seen as weakness. It's no wonder men are more likely to die by suicide when you're told your whole life not to show vulnerability, or you're less likely to reach out before it's too late. For women, the pressures can look different, but no less harmful. Women are expected to be caregivers, to hold families together, to be selfless and endlessly patient. Struggling with mental illness or mental health can feel like failing at those roles, leading to shame and silence. And for those of us who don't neatly fit into those gender boxes, whether trans, non-binary, or simply refusing to play along, the stigma doubles. We're already told our identities are wrong or unnatural, so admitting to mental health struggles can feel like confirming society's prejudice. Here in South Africa, those pressures are amplified by our history. Apartheid didn't just segregate along race, it also reinforced rigid, militarized ideals of masculinity. Black men in particular were expected to be providers under impossible economic conditions, while being denied opportunities by structural racism. That legacy lingers. Financial stress, unemployment, and the cultural expectation that a man must provide can create crushing shame when those expectations can't be met. At the same time, women, especially black women, have long been positioned as the backbone of families and communities, often holding together households under poverty, displacement, and trauma. The weight of this quote-unquote strength stereotype can make it very difficult for women to admit when they're struggling. The truth is, no human can perfectly live up to these gender ideals. They're unrealistic and they isolate us from each other. Compassion gets lost when we measure worth by stereotypes instead of by our shared humanity. But here's the hopeful part. Stigma is learned, which means it can be unlearned. We can challenge these expectations by talking openly, by modeling vulnerability and compassion, and by showing each other that it's human and not shameful to struggle. We can break the stigma. We do it by talking openly about mental health and by educating ourselves and others to bust the myths. As IASP says, changing the narrative on suicide is about transforming how we perceive this complex issue. It's about shifting from a culture of silence and lack of understanding to one of openness, empathy, and support. In the interest of shifting from silence to openness, I'll share something personal. I am a suicide survivor. I had been struggling with depression and internalized transphobia for over a decade in silence. Since my adolescence, I had believed that I should handle any difficulties I faced on my own, that I shouldn't burden anyone with my struggles, that everyone else was managing, so what was wrong with me that I was finding it so hard? I attempted suicide at a time in my life when I felt like a complete failure, like I had tried everything I could think of to cope, and that I simply couldn't do it. I felt isolated and alone, and that everyone would be better off without me. I believed there was no other way out, no other way to go on, no option left for me to try. After my attempt, I began psychotherapy and was put on antidepressants. Before that, I had always dismissed therapy because I thought, how could anyone say something that is instantly going to make everything better? And it wasn't instant. Therapy didn't make everything instantly better, but it did make things better. It did help more than I could possibly say to talk openly and honestly about what I was thinking and feeling to someone who listened attentively with empathy and unconditional non-judgment. For the first time in my life, I knew that I wasn't the only one who had ever felt that way. I wasn't alone. I wasn't broken or irredeemable. No one is. You aren't. Because I had been living with this internalized stigma and shame around my identity and mental health, therapy was a long journey for me. And in the beginning, antidepressants helped me to manage the difficult feelings I was working through in therapy. And one of the other most valuable things that therapy gave me was the language and the confidence and the insight to effectively express my feelings and to effectively express my needs to the people in my life, so that I wasn't isolated anymore. I wasn't suffering in silence anymore. And I was opening channels of clear communication through which my loved ones could also feel safe to express their own feelings and needs. That's how we change the narrative, by talking, listening, and refusing to let shame have the final word. Why suicide happens. Factors and stressors. It's hard to face why someone might feel driven to end their life. We've discussed how tragically common suicide is around the world, especially in low and middle income countries. The reasons are multifaceted, shaped by a mix of social, psychological, cultural, and biological factors. In real life, that means there is rarely just one cause. Often, suicide comes after a storm of pressures building up, and during a moment of overwhelming crisis. Importantly, suicide is not a sign of weakness or selfishness, but of unbearable pain and hopelessness when someone's coping resources have been exhausted. Personal struggles with mental and emotional health are often part of the picture. Disorders like depression or anxiety can make everyday life feel crushing. For example, major depression can flood someone's mind with constant hopelessness and worthlessness. Or severe anxiety can make even simple tasks unbearable. The World Health Organization notes that depression and alcohol use disorders are among the most common conditions linked to suicide. Alcohol and drug problems can also worsen despair because substances can intensify negative emotions and reduce our inhibitions. Any one of these can become a heavy burden and increase our risky behavior. A prior suicide attempt is a very strong warning sign. People who have tried before carry both the memory of the pain and a higher risk of trying again. But it's important to stress, having a mental health challenge or past trauma doesn't doom anyone to die by suicide. These issues only make it harder to handle new stress. Everyday life pressures like money troubles or health problems are powerful stressors too. Poverty and unemployment can drive despair. Without enough income, people may struggle to feed their families or pay for rent. In South Africa, over half of adults live below the national poverty line, and about 38% live under the international poverty threshold. A local study found that young men who didn't have enough to eat, that is, food insecurity, were much more likely to have suicidal thoughts. Worldwide, the World Health Organization finds that financial problems are a top stressor linked to suicide. Debt, job loss, or facing sudden poverty can all push someone towards desperation. Chronic illness and pain can add another layer. Living with a serious or long-term illness like cancer, HIV, or a disabling condition can be draining both physically and emotionally. Constant pain, the worry about the future, and sometimes social stigma around illness can make someone lose hope. The World Health Organization explicitly lists chronic pain and illness as a risk factor for suicide. In South Africa, diseases like HIV and AIDS and tuberculosis carry not only health impacts, but also social isolation and stigma, which can heighten the burden. Even beyond diseases, having a disability or ongoing health problems can mean extra costs and limitations in daily life, adding to stress. Experiencing violence or abuse can leave deep wounds that also raise suicide risk. People who survive domestic violence, childhood abuse, assault, or war often carry intense emotional scars. The World Health Organization emphasizes that conflict, disaster, violence, and abuse are strongly associated with suicidal behavior. For example, a person who has lost family in a violent incident or has been beaten may feel hopeless and unprotected in the world. In South Africa and many communities, high rates of violence, whether gang violence, street crime, or abuse at home, mean many individuals have undergone such trauma. Research in South Africa found that both childhood violence and recent violence in adulthood were significantly linked to suicidal thoughts among young men. Apart from overt violence, discrimination and social injustice are devastating stressors too. When people are treated unfairly or hated for who they are because of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or disability, it erodes their sense of belonging and worth. The World Health Organization points out that suicide rates are especially high in groups facing systemic stigma. For example, refugees, migrants, indigenous communities, LGBTQIA+ people, and prisoners. In any society facing racism, xenophobia, homophobia, or sexism can leave a person feeling isolated and under attack. In South Africa, despite laws to protect equality, many people still face prejudice or violence because of their identity. These experiences can compound other problems. For instance, a person who loses their job and also faces daily racial discrimination may feel there's no support system at all. Feeling alone or unsupported is another common factor. People who lack a close social network or who have lost meaningful relationships often say they feel invisible or completely isolated. The World Health Organization notes that a sense of isolation is strongly linked to suicide. In plain terms, loneliness can make every problem worse. Without someone to share burdens, our hopes can quickly fade. Research confirms this connection. A recent review found that loneliness is indeed correlated with suicidal thoughts and behaviors across many cultures. This doesn't just mean living alone. Someone can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly lonely if they feel misunderstood or rejected. Usually, suicide risk grows when multiple factors overlap. For instance, a person living in poverty or financial stress who is also chronically ill, that is health stress, has no close family, isolation, and feels discriminated against or traumatized, faces a stack of hardships. Any one of these might be unbearable. Together, they make life feel like a real trap. Even something like a sudden relationship breakup or losing a job might be survivable alone, but after months of depression or after many other losses, it can become the final straw. Through all this, it's vital to remember, suicide is preventable. By recognizing these risk factors, mental health struggles, economic strain, past trauma, social isolation, and discrimination, we can be more compassionate and provide support before someone reaches their breaking point. If someone you know faces any combination of these challenges, reaching out, listening without judgment, and connecting them to help can make a life-saving difference. Changing the narrative. One simple but powerful way to reduce stigma is to change the language that we use. And changing the narrative, reducing the stigma around suicide, even boils down to the most fundamental way we have of talking about suicide. That's when we talk about it. People still use the word commit when they discuss suicide. But that word, commit, contributes to the stigma and the shame around suicide. Because in what other contexts do we use that word? We say someone commits a crime or commits a sin, which both carry negative connotations of legal and moral judgment. something deserving of punishment. So when we say someone commits suicide, we are conjuring up all those connotations of judgment, crime, sin, and punishment, which was, of course, intentional when the word started being associated with suicide. After all, the Catholic Church still considers suicide the greatest sin, because you can't repent for it once you're dead. That is why we are trying to change the basic way we talk about suicide, moving away from the word commit to saying that someone died by suicide or of suicide. This phrasing, died by suicide, reflects that understanding that suicide is usually not a considered choice that someone made in their rational mind. That suicide is an outcome of ill health or desperation or despair. For the same reason, we don't talk about successful or unsuccessful suicides. It's not an achievement or a failure either way. Instead, we talk about suicide deaths, or fatal or non-fatal suicide attempts. Calling someone a suicide victim can also be problematic. Instead, we refer to someone who died by suicide, in order to reduce the risk of harm while also increasing awareness and understanding of suicide and its complexities. If you believe someone is struggling, it is good to check in with them. Research shows that talking about suicide does not increase the risk of someone attempting suicide. It can be such a relief to acknowledge the heavy burden that they are carrying. However, please avoid sharing the details of someone's suicide method and location. Research shows that public communication that includes descriptions of suicide method or location has been associated with increased rates of suicide behavior and imitation of that suicide method or location. Language matters. It shapes how we think and feel, and how much compassion we can extend. Identifying warning signs. So, how do we know when someone might be struggling? Warning signs can show up physically, behaviorally, or emotionally. Physical warning signs include constant fatigue, headaches, stomach issues, sleep disturbances, and weight changes. Behavioral warning signs include withdrawal, declining engagement, absenteeism, risk-taking, or substance use. And emotional warning signs include persistent sadness, anxiety, sudden mood swings, saying things like, "I can't go on," or "everyone would be better off without me." If you notice these warning signs, take them seriously. They are not attention-seeking. They're signals of real pain. How to help. Mental health first aid. If you're worried about someone, here's what you can do. Firstly, recognize the warning signs. Be aware of behavioral changes, verbal cues, and emotional signs that a person might be in crisis. Secondly, choose the right time and place. Approach the person in a private, non-distracting environment where they feel comfortable and safe. Avoid approaching them when they are highly agitated or in the middle of something, if possible. Thirdly, be direct but compassionate. Start the conversation by expressing your concern in a non-threatening way. For example, "I've noticed you've seemed a bit off lately and I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? What's going on? Ask directly if they are thinking about suicide. Research shows that asking this question does not plant the idea in someone's mind, but rather can provide relief and an opportunity to share. For example, have you been feeling so overwhelmed that you're thinking about hurting yourself or ending your life? Fourthly, listen without judgment. Let them speak freely about their feelings. Avoid interrupting or offering immediate solutions or cliches like, it could be worse. Validate their emotions by acknowledging the difficulty of their situation without minimizing their pain. For example, I can't imagine how tough this must be for you, but I'm here to listen. Fifthly, reassure them and focus on safety. Reassure them that they're not alone and that help is available. If they indicate that they are thinking about suicide and have a plan, do not leave them alone. Stay with them until further help is arranged and help them to connect with professional support. And then, lastly, follow up. A single conversation can be life-saving, but ongoing care also matters. Self-care for those in crisis. Take small, manageable steps. When you are in a crisis, even basic self-care like eating, sleeping, or getting out of bed can seem impossible. Focus on one small step at a time, such as getting adequate rest or eating a nutritious meal. Choose activities that you usually find relaxing or comforting, even if they currently seem unappealing. Sometimes simply engaging in the activity can begin to shift your mood. Nurture your social connections. Stay connected with trusted friends or family. Isolation can exacerbate suicidal thoughts, so reaching out to someone you trust can provide emotional grounding. Seek out crisis resources. Tap into immediate crisis resources such as suicide hotlines. Here in South Africa, we have Helpline, or the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, SADAG, which you can use if you feel overwhelmed. Get professional self-care. Establish regular appointments with a counselor or a therapist as part of your self-care routine. Having consistent support from a professional is crucial for long-term management of suicidal thoughts and depression. Self-care for those offering support. This isn't just about helping others, it's also about looking after yourself. Set boundaries. Understand your limits. It's not your job to fix the person, but rather to support them in getting the help they need. Know when to step back and to involve a professional. Avoid overextending yourself emotionally. It's okay to let others know about the situation if it becomes overwhelming. Understand secondary trauma. Be aware of the emotional toll of supporting someone in crisis. Signs of secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue include feeling emotionally drained, anxious, or even detached. If you notice these signs, seek professional help for yourself. After a difficult conversation, reach out to a trusted friend, a loved one, or a professional to debrief. This helps to process your own feelings. Utilize professional care and workplace resources like EAPs if you feel affected by the person's situation. Practice self-relieving techniques. Engage in stress management activities such as meditation, exercise, or journaling to release the emotional burden of helping someone in crisis. Ensure you take regular breaks from work and maintain a balanced routine that includes self-care activities like hobbies, relaxation, and spending time with loved ones. Prevention and systemic change. Prevention isn't just health sector work. It requires collaboration across education, workplaces, justice, media, and communities. And it requires investment, not just in hospitals, but in community-based, accessible, affordable mental health care services. Workplaces, schools, and families can be either sites of risk or sites of protection. We have to choose to make them protective. I will include a list of helplines and websites and other resources in the show notes for this episode. Save them and share them. They can make a difference. Changing the narrative on suicide means shifting from silence to compassion, from shame to support, from despair to hope. If you're struggling, please hear me. You are not alone. And if you're supporting someone, know that your listening ear and your compassion can be life-saving. Together, we can change the story. Thank you for being here. Look after yourself, and remember that everyone deserves to live with their optimal mental health. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectionalpsychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectionalpsychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsych.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology. But mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Cite Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.